Okay, welcome all to the Zoom presentation with Laura Lyster-Mensh. We are all here tonight to learn from Laura about this fascinating topic of what is an end-of-life doula. So I'm sure some of us have heard of this before. Some of us have heard definitely of doulas in terms of childbirth and supporting new mothers and new families bring a new child into the world. But what does it look like at the other end? So before I introduce Laura, I just wanted to welcome everybody. I'm Nadia Mercer. I'm the Executive Director of the Greater Brooklyn Intergenerational Village. We have some of our members here tonight. We have our community organizer here tonight, Kinyofu Limwengu. And we also have members from other villages. So thank you all for coming and supporting Greater Brooklyn Village just by being here and being curious to learn about end-of-life doulas. So I'm going to pass it over to Laura, our doula for the night. She is a doula in residency at the Congressional Cemetery in DC. She's doing a lot of work, a lot of discussions to share with people about this topic and about death positivity. So she's going to do a short presentation and then it'll be like an open floor, a Q&A with Laura afterwards. So I pass it to you, Laura. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nadia. And it's an honor to be here. The first thing I want to say is thank you to Alice Walker for making this introduction. We met in person recently and got along like a house on fire and had many conversations. And it just to me that you would invite me to be part of this presentation to talk to all of you. So I'm going to turn on my PowerPoint so that you can see my screen very briefly, just kind of give you an overview. And then I really want to hear from all of you. I'm interested in your questions. I learn from your questions. I'm kind of a seeker and on learning myself. So there may be some among you more about this topic than I do. And so we can would be my goal with my whole project, which I will explain. So, actually, I'm going to go back a slide. Can you see my?
No. I can, yes.
Can you see what is a death doula?
Swipe left and see what happens. Swipe.
No, nothing's happening.
What do you see? Do you see the gallery? You see people's faces?
I see a circle going around saying Laura Lyster-Mensh has started screen sharing.
Okay.
And at the bottom right, I see a little picture of a person with a green minus sign at the top.
Okay. So your phone, your iPad is trying to share the screen. It must be your internet. There's nothing that you can do right now that I know.
Okay.
Well, Janet,
you.
I can promise that my slides are have very little information on them. They're just pictures, so you will not miss anything if you're out of sync on that. As you said, I'm here to talk about what is a death doula. And I'm actually going to talk about what it isn't more than what it is. But we'll get to that. So people ask me, how does one become, how does it end up? It turns out that in my case, what happened is I started out being a very overly certain child, as you can see, with her gloves. I was born in 1961, so I'm of that era. And I was a very curious, but very controlling little kid. Then I became a bit of a flower girl, as you can see. Apparently that's also part of the journey. And then as an adult, I became a writer and an advocate. And those are all three parts of my becoming, at this phase of my life, being a death doula. As far as training, and we're going to get into what it means to be trained as an end-of-life doula or a death doula. In my case, what I chose was an organization called INNELDA, which is short for international, it's an international group. And I'm going to move something off my screen here. It's International End of Life Doula Association. I chose them for reasons because it fit me, but there are lots of organizations that you could get training at, and I'm going to share those resources later if you'd like them. I also took training through an organization called Doing Death Differently, and that training is one that many of you who might volunteer for hospice may be familiar with, because it is for most hospices, they do have people, if you want to volunteer, they have people go through the Doing Death Differently training. So I did about a month of training, month and a half with INNELDA. I did a month or more of training with Doing Death Differently. And then now I do a lot of continuing education. I did most of my training during COVID, so most of it was online. And now I'm able to do, I do continual training. Every week I'm on some sort of class trying to learn more. There is a lot to learn. There's a lot to learn from. There's so much. You could spend your entire life learning more and becoming better at and understanding this world better. So what exactly is a doula? I put these pictures here because I find that people have some strange ideas about what an end-of-life doula is. And I think we start with this sort of grim, bedside, scary, death, dark image. More currently, I find that people that are very much in the death space are more into the kind of sexy vibe. That's Wednesday. That's a TV series going on right now. But we have these ideas, and what's in common between these? They are women. They are one's German, one's American, of Latin background, but a certain image of the kind of person who does this is not wrong. I'm afraid that there is a certain luxury to being of a certain age, as I am. There's a luxury of having enough money to go get training, to go into work that may or may not pay you, to start your own business, to do any of these things is not something for everyone, because it is not possible for most people to take a break from life and do that kind of work for uncertain outcomes. So I do think that we need to keep in mind that although this is not untrue, that doulas are generally going to fit a certain profile, it is changing. It needs to change, because death is very, we're all going to die. And if we want to have equity in death, we are going to need to make sure that we are welcoming all kinds of people into the death care space, and that we make sure that these spaces are safe and positive and available, and that we make sure that people get paid for their work too. So those are some equity issues that I think are very important. So what is a death doula? The technical term is actually end-of-life doula. Most people use end-of-life doula, and then my training was actually as an end-of-life doula. Some people, and I would include myself among them, don't really love the end-of-life doula term, because it feels like a euphemism trying to make it a little lighter, as if, oh no, we're not really about death. But also end of life, I found, is heard differently by different people. Some people think of it as the period, towards the end of our life. And some people think of it as just the moment of death. And with such an unclear term that's also maybe a cheat phrase, I tend to call myself or refer to it as death doula. But as in all things, if someone wants to be called something, we call them what they want to be called. And there are quite a few other terms. Death midwife, end of life coach, funeral guide, death and dying guide, doula, you name it. There are terms out there that are all going for the same kind of thing. But in my training, in INNELDA in particular, end of life doulas It's a specific thing. It's a non-medical role as an advocate and supporter for people who are in the last phase of life, and not necessarily just the last days, but when they know and are looking towards the stage of dying in their life. They're thinking about mortality, and that this encompasses different types of things: practical, spiritual, and emotional. And as we'll get into, what one person does as an end-of-life doula and what another one does won't be the same, but Anela trains in a certain scope of practice. Other organizations have their own scope of practice. And should you choose to hire an end-of-life doula, or should you choose to be an end-of-life doula, and I have information on both for you, you would be choosing who you get trained by, and you would be choosing what fits for you. I'm going to say that my definition on this question is that an end-of-life doula is a person who's trained to advocate for and support dying people before death, while dying, and after death. It's all three stages. We are invited by the dying person or their family. It's not something that your hospice assigns to you. It is not something that, is a Medicaid covered service. It is not a medical service in any way. It is an invitation by a person or their family to be the advocate and supporter for that person. It's unique. I cannot think of anything else quite like it. And it's not exactly the same as a birth doula or a midwife. It's kind of a unique situation, but it does share this, is that you're supporting the dying person and their family. It's not just the dying person. It can be a paid role or a volunteer role. We can get into the ethics of that. And there is no one definition of how to become a death doula, how to judge whether someone's a good fit. We do not have, it's kind of like, I could compare it to decades ago when yoga instructors started to become part of, or massage therapists. It's a fairly new thing. And I just want to give you an example of how, of the newness. You've come of age when there's a national day for you. And the first National Death Doula Day was in 2019 because a particular death doula signed up to have it be a day. And there is one next week. I thought that was notable, that this is it. You can name another one if you want, but this is the one Death Doula Day that I know of and will in some way be celebrating. Sorry, I'm having trouble moving it forward in a timely fashion. So I just want to tell you how I show up as a death doula. I am not like all doulas. And as a matter of fact, I'm a little unusual in that what I do is I volunteer to sit with people that are dying who do not have friends and family. I do that by volunteering at Sibley Hospital. There is a hospice ward there with 10 beds. And the best part of my week is when I put on my little lanyard. I love a lanyard. And I take the bus. I love the D6. And I go out to my little bus stop and I go to Sibley and spend time just being with people. I go around to the rooms and I see rooms that don't have any personal effects. No phone, no glasses, no pajamas, no blanket, no flowers. And I go to those rooms and I spend time with people. Either if they're talking still, that's fine. If they're not, I sit with people who are at that last stage of life without other people. And so I volunteer my time. There's the finances of that. And that's a luxury I have and an honor to do here in the city where too many people die alone. And we do not die alone rich. I would say that very few people who are rich die alone. I have described myself as the weirdest candy striper ever. When I come into this environment, I'm coming in not, because I'm an expert. I'm not a medical person. I'm just there to do good and to learn. And I'm old enough to remember candy stripers. I never was one, but now I am this sort of weird, ghoulish candy striper who goes to the hospital and helps out on the wards. But I actually think a better analogy than Candy Striper, when I really think about it, is that it's more like going to an orphanage. And what is the job if we volunteered at an orphanage? You got all these lovely children. What do we need to do for them? And it is what I do, is just to love. I just love people. I just sit with them and love them and hold their hand and care for them in their last moments, their last hours, their last days. And as I said, it is an enormous honor. And if you ever feel called to do such a thing or are interested in it, I will very much happily welcome you to see if that's a good fit for you. And I can highly recommend our ward at Sibley. People ask me how I feel when I am sitting with dying people, and this includes people that have died in my own life. You reach a certain age, a lot of you know this, where you see a lot of death. And I've seen enough to have had a range of emotions, and they're all okay. And so it's not like it's euphoria all the time. It is sometimes euphoria. It is not always exciting. Sometimes it's boring. I have had every emotion you can imagine, but I have had a lot of impactful moments among the many hours that I've spent doing this. And by the way, I've only been doing it for a year. So I'm in that stage where I'm just learning and growing. I've seen a lot of people die, but doing this particular work is new for me. I've been told that I'm fairly good at it. Mostly because I think that I have always taken the attitude that it is not about me. I am not doing this to people. I'm not doing it at people. I'm not doing it so that they will like me or care about me. I am sitting with people because they're human and they need not be alone. And if they don't look like they want me around, I leave them alone. But again, it is literally selfless work. And you have to be comfortable with that. And not everyone is. So if you're going to do this kind of bedside work, it has to be that it's not for you. It's still very fulfilling. So many of you may have seen that that there was a newspaper article in the Washington Post early this year that talked about this project I'm doing. So there's two things I'm doing as a death doula. I'm doing one part of death doulaing, which is sitting with people at end of life who are alone. I'm doing another part, which is the education and planning part of being a doula. And I do those at Congressional Cemetery. We call it Death Doula Days. I do office hours, 3 hours on Saturdays. And you can see people come, we eat cake. You can see my real goal is to get people to do their end of life planning, to plan their end of life wishes. And so I have lots of tools, but I kind of sneak it in by bringing them on little field trips and feeding them a lot of sweets. My goal is that at the end of the year and at the end of my residency, that maybe 1,000 Washingtonians have moved a little forward in their acceptance of death, their planning, their peace of mind, less fear, and they all get their paperwork together and clean up their junk drawers. I use a range of tools, as you can see, and then we do games and things like, for example, we write our own obituaries. And also, a lot of people are interested in being a death doula or finding a death doula, hiring a death doula. So I'm compiling information to share with people so that they can do that. And I welcome any of you, if you thought that you might want to hire one or you might want to be one, we have resources to help you. So I'm going to go to questions now, but I wanted to just let you know that I'm very happy to keep in touch. This is my project, is talking to people, and you are the first of 3 villages that I will be talking with in the next month. And I'm very excited about how villages are changing the landscape. And my mother is part of one, and I'm really grateful that my 84-year-old mother, she thinks that she's just helping others, but really she's actually a member. So it makes me happy. So I'm going to stop sharing. and I welcome your questions. And I just realized, can I do, I want to look at my slides because I realized that there was a slide that may not have.
We have one
Come out.
question, one hand raised. Amber.
Yes, hey, thank you for coming. I saw you a couple weeks ago at a Capital Caring event and you did something sort of like this, but I'm intrigued. So thanks for sharing here in this forum too, Laura. So it sounds like you spend a lot of time at the cemetery doing that, and you said you're doing the Capital Caring thing over at Sibley. But in terms of the practice of Death Doula, what would you say in your day you're spending the most time on? Is it just offering presents, or are you doing do you find yourself doing a lot of funeral planning or like advanced care planning or anything like that?
Because I've split my role into two pieces and I do it in groups and I'm not doing what most death doulas would do, which is to be an individual working with an individual client. And I've kind of done that deliberately in this year because I want to have more experience before I do work with individual clients, if I ever do. Most doulas would choose what they want to do. So it's very individual. Some end-of-life doulas work with people only on vigil planning, only on actual deathbed stuff. Some do life review, and that's, all they do. There's specialties, and sometimes people will work in teams so that, if there's someone who does this part and there's someone who does that part, that the person gets all of it. Unfortunately, a lot of people do not find or hire an end-of-life doula or a death doula until really late in the process. What I would love is for everyone to know what an end-of-life doula is early enough so that they could find one and bring one on board for their family member or for themselves early enough so that they could enjoy the benefits of the whole range. And finding and developing a relationship with a death doula would be very individual. Like I said, there's no one certification, and each end-of-life or death doula has their own specialty. I've chosen as my thing, my calling is to do this in groups and to anonymous people. So I don't get the opportunity to do that one-on-one planning, except with family members, fortunately. So I'm not a good example of most death doulas, but the ones that I know that do the whole spectrum, they kind of integrate into each other. Figuring out what someone's life review is going to help you figure out what their values and interests are in their actual dying time, and also helps understand what their wishes are for after they've passed in terms of their legacy. So I would say that the three phases kind of work with each other, and each of us is going to come with a certain amount of stuff already done, or that what's important to them. So I think it's going to be very unique to the client and to the end-of-life doula. And I apologize because I realize now that one of the slides that I had, Amber, was kind of delineated, and I don't know where that slide went off to. It delineated some of the different roles that doulas take, but I don't want to take up your time going to find where that one got off to. But there's a lot of information out there if you just Google this to see what different focuses people have. And if you want to hire someone, you're going to want to talk about all of the things.
Laura.
Any other questions for Laura? Linda, you had your hand raised for a minute, and then you took it down, but.
Yeah, I have a hard time with putting stuff up and taking it down. I had a question, and I think you kind of partially answered the question. It's regarding the type of doula I would need. I would want someone to talk to beforehand. My family is having a hard time, especially Black women, older. You know, I want to do it now. I don't want to wait.
Linda, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Linda, but we're having trouble hearing. It sounds like your mic, it's just moving around a lot, and maybe that's the trouble.
Now,
There's feedback.
can you hear me now?
That's much better, much clearer.
Okay. So my question, I guess, would be what type of doula I would need. I'm having family members not wanting to talk about it, and I don't want to wait till the last minute to talk about it. And it sounds like something I would actually be interested in, but I don't know if I would want an individual doula or participate in a group type environment.
Well, it's such a great question, because I wish that there was a way to match people according to what they're interested in. So what I would say, and actually I've done this myself. So my mother is, I'm going to want to hire someone when my mom or dad comes to a point where we can really have these conversations. They don't want to have them now, unfortunately. But I actually have someone in mind that I'm talking to about that in preparation for when we need it. And I think it would be a very good idea if most of us had an idea of the people in our area. So two of the handouts that I have that I would love to share with anyone who wants them. One is how to find an end-of-life doula, and the other is how to become an end-of-life doula. And on the find, what happens is, for example, I was trained in ANELDA. My name is on a list through ANELDA. If you're trained through Doula Givers, another group, that's going to be a different list of people. There's very little cross posting. So unfortunately, there's no shortcut to kind of going onto the website of these individual organizations, finding your fit for, some of them are more spiritual. Some of them, the doulas are very much working with hospice. Others have got a different vibe going, and they're also religious things. There are, many spiritual questions at end of life that you'd want to make sure that you were connected with the right, vibe, cultural reasons, language reasons. So there's no way to predict for any individual what would be a good fit. But I love what you're saying is you want to start now at looking at it. And you don't have to hire someone now, but you can find out who's in your, geographical region. And there's lots of end-of-life doulas. So you can start looking at that. You can start looking at these organizations to see which one might be a good fit for the training that they gave. And, have a short list of people because you don't know who will be available when the situation happens. But once you know the language, once you've really thought it through, and you have a short list of people that you might hire for yourself or for others, you're going to be way ahead. Just the fact that you know it exists is a step. And then the next step would be doing some personal work to figure out what's your fit for someone who would do this role. It's very personal, very personal.
Thank you.
Okay, Alice has her hand up.
Yes, Laura, hi. First of all, I want to thank you for agreeing to do the presentation. I find information about the Death Doula very intriguing on many levels. And I do want to tell people, on full disclosure, she and I met in a cemetery.
We did.
Yeah, we met in a cemetery. And my question is, you mentioned that in some cases people do this work for no cost, and then sometimes people can charge a fee. What would be an idea of what a fee might be to hire a death doula?
Again, this is such a difficult question. I have not seen any rate sheets on this. I know that, for example, after my training, we were told you should, kind of, look around and figure out what is best for you. But what's complicated is it's not just what someone would charge, it's whether they're charging per hour, whether they're charging per, the kind of service. It might be where you are geographically as well. I mean, we're all basically in the same area, so would expect, it's going to be DC prices. But I think that there is so much individuality, and people they don't talk that much about the money. And I think we all should. I would love it if I could compile a list of everyone's hourly rates, and I don't know. And I haven't been able to convince many people. There is another doula on this call, I happen to know. Can we ask, may we ask Russ if he would uncloak himself and see if he would answer that question?
Well, thank you. Yeah, so the hourly rate for me, I'm in Philadelphia, is $100 an hour. There are people who charge more and there are people who charge less. Then there are people who package up a number of sessions. So for instance, say you wanted to be planning for a vigil. So the doula is going to probably estimate, all right, we're going to have 3 different sessions where we meet to talk through what it is that you want and then to get it documented. So, there would probably be a kind of a package deal that would be set out to provide that plan.
When I've heard people actually quote prices, it generally seems to be somewhere around 90, 100 an hour. But again, it depends on, we're talking about death. I mean, death does not go, it is not it would be very hard to predict how much time it would be. For example, for planning, each individual is going to be different. And then there's how long will they live and be meeting with you, and how often. It's going to have to be very individual, I think.
May I also add one more observation, Laura? So let's just talk for a minute about the vigil work, because the amount of time a particular family might want our support is going to depend on how much family support there is. So for instance, like Laura was commenting about sitting at the bedside in a hospice unit, well, somebody with no family, they could use a doula 24/7 in that situation. Of course, that's going to require a rather hefty budget to do that. On the other hand, if you have a lot of family support, that would mean that you might not need us at all. And then if you're somewhere in between, maybe, people tend to say, okay, I can come 4 hours a day for the next 5 days. One of the roles that we serve in that particular time frame is to provide respite for caregivers, because at that point in the journey of the dying person, it's traumatic, it's intense, it's a lot of emotion going on. And as a caregiver, you're going to experience all that, and caregivers have to take care of themselves. Self-care is one of the most important things, both for doulas and for caregivers. So we can give caregivers a break.
I found the slide. For some reason it lagged and it was blank when I first brought it up, but I'm going to share a slide that, all right, can you see this how doulas serve slide?
We see your whole screen. So maybe you could say, so it's small, we see. Maybe you could say slideshow mode or something like that, and then go.
All right, is that?
It's the same.
Visible? There's a lot of words on here. I'm so sorry.
Maybe present view. There we go.
That's
Great.
better?
Better.
Okay.
And maybe you
This-
could read it.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a terrible slide. It has way too many words on it. And I hate slides like this, but I'm happy to send this slide to anyone who would like to look at it. The reason I think this is important is that it talks about so many of the things that an end-of-life doula might be doing. And that's why it's hard to define clearly what our scope is because, and I'm not going to read it, but just give you an idea. To speak openly and frankly about dying. How often does anyone have anyone to do that with? Creating advanced care directives, the meaning of the person's life and legacy, discussing end-of-life care planning, developing a plan for the space, feels and sounds at end of life, incorporating traditions, appropriate ways of touching, focused and intuitive presence, physical and practical care to ease the burden of caregivers, as Russ mentioned, providing respite, as Russ mentioned, explain the symptoms and signs of the dying process. By the way, this is something I'm just amazed at, is how little people sitting at bedside, family members, understand what is going on physically and emotionally with the dying person. And if people had it explained to them, I think that they would feel so much better. And that is something that an end-of-life doula is trained in. And it can provide tremendous comfort to, for example, explain, why is the mouth open? Why, are they in pain? What's that noise? Why are their feet feel this way? When you have someone to explain it, who isn't a medical professional in a hurry, and we have the ability to be the advocate for that person and translate what's going on for them with the family and friends. I think it's one of the most important things we can do. Processing emotions, supporting spiritual practices, and guiding people through the early ages of grieving. So these are just some of the things that we can do as an advocate for a dying person to help them and their family. It's a new idea. It's a new profession in a lot of ways. But it's also a very old one. Haven't humans been doing this for each other forever, especially women? But I do think that we can be helpful to each other if we know that expertise is there. I think Barbara had a question. You're still muted.
Okay. I think most of us have heard of hospice or had some experience with hospice. Can you briefly explain what the difference might be between a doula and the care that one gets through hospice?
I love this question because it really gets to the heart of it. It's like, what is missing in someone's team when they're in hospice? Maybe, I think a lot of people feel like, well, hospice has got it covered. There's spiritual help, there's medical help, there's maybe volunteers, but the end-of-life doula role is actually more of an advocate for the person in the context of death, rather than the context of their medical care or the context of their spiritual care even. It's a person who is focused on this, that this person is going through, their family is going through. And even in hospice, people don't really talk about the dying part. I mean, we all know someone who's in hospice could die, but where is the support for specifically about this transition, and who is advocating for the patient in their personal needs? Hospice is not going to usually be thinking and advocating for the person, for example, on what kind of smells and sights and sounds and comforts that are individual to them. Who are the people that they're going to want to talk to or be with? What's their history? Where's the meaning of their life? Hospice does all these things. This is a kind of a different segment. And ideally, an end-of-life doula is trained to support the hospice team not to do something, against the team, but is there to help the team do what they're doing. For example, I volunteer in a hospice. I'm not really acting as a doula so much as I am just a basic volunteer, but because I do have the training I have as an end-of-life doula, I'm a better hospice volunteer. And I can do things that the hospice team have now, to be honest, at first they were like, well, I don't know about this doula thing. And I was a little worried about, some people are worried about saying that they are trained as end-of-life doulas when they are in hospice. But hospices are now coming to understand that this role is something they really want. And it's becoming, it's coming together rather than being in opposition or different spheres. They go together, they're synergistic, I think, ideally. Russ, you deal with the same question. Do you have anything to add on that?
Well, I guess I would say this. So remember that hospice is not a place. Hospice is a service, a medical service. So Laura and I, we both volunteer in a hospice inpatient unit. That's a place, which it's just designed to serve people who are on a hospice service. However, most people aren't in an inpatient unit on hospice service. They're in their home, or maybe they're in a skilled nursing facility, or even in a hospital. And so when the hospice service is brought to them in wherever they are, you need to remember that the time that the hospice service will be bringing to the dying person is rather limited, actually. Meaning you might get a nurse once a week, you might get a CNA, maybe a couple hours a week. You might get the chaplain once a month, you might get a social worker once a month. So there's not a lot of actual hours from the hospice team. So that's where we can, like Laura said, that's where we can complement what they do by being more present when the hospice service might not be.
There's a lot of hours in which, well, like even on a hospice ward where people are spending most of their time alone, and their families are also alone with their person, and without someone to talk to about the practical and the existential issues of being at end of life. I think I saw a question in the chat. Let me look. Want to share the handouts. Can I share them in the chat? Okay. I made 2 images.
I'll email everyone who registered with the handouts if you want to email them to me.
Why don't I do that? I'll do that after we hung up. And someone asked, oh, thank you so much for asking, what time on Saturdays at Congressional? So what I would suggest, we do them most Saturdays, although we are taking a break for about a month. Most Saturdays in 2023, we will have something, but it's going to be different every week. So my suggestion would be to go to the congressionalcemetery.org website and Google or search on the site for Death Doula Days. It's actually under the Death Positive Programming page. I know that's a lot, but just search for, or actually you could just ask Google, put in my name and Death Doula Days, it'll come up really high. And then get on our mailing list. I promise it's only once a week or less, and it will list what happened the week before, and it will say what the topics that are coming up. And if you want to join us, we do ask for an RSVP if you could, because my husband bakes and he needs to know how many people to bake for.
That's so nice. I can include the link to Death Doula Days in that website and the follow-up email as well.
That would be great. We would love to see, we're seeing people from all over the region. Russ came down from Pennsylvania. The press on this has been very generous, and I think it's because people are very interested in the topic. And if only one thing happens from all this, which is that people all know the term death doula or end of life doula, I will be very happy, because I think that this is a way to be compassionate to ourselves and to our loved ones, is to make sure that they have an advocate who's thinking about their values, their desires, and understands that they're at this critical point in their life, not hiding from the topic, because the hiding from the topic to me is kind of a cruelty that we have in our society.
And can you repeat what you do on Saturdays?
So we call it Death Doula Days, and we basically have been taking a 3-hour chunk of Saturday. I'm changing it to 2 hours, starting in May. But choose a topic, and we gather together around the table or in our chapel. By the way, we have indoor places to be. It's not, people think, oh, it's a cemetery, you're outside. I promise we have heat and air conditioning. In 2 different buildings, one smaller and one bigger. And we just do a topic or do a project. I like conversation, and we have death cafes, but what I really love are activities. So for example, one day we had the Threshold Singers come and sing to people who would just practice dying. And these singers would come and sing around. It made us all cry, but it was also this beautiful exercise in practicing dying. That was an exercise. We had a write our obituaries exercise. We play cards. We play the death deck, which is apparently all doulas have one in their pocket, because Russ can attest to this. We had a meeting of doulas. And we had like 24 people come, and 3 of us had a death deck in our pocket. It's a wonderful game, and it starts conversations about death in a hearted but very Russ has got his box. Anyway, you can buy these boxes, or you could come play them at Congressional with us, because if I have a spare moment during Death Doula Days where nothing's happening, I just pull out the card game and we just play it. Oh my gosh, we've done so many cool activities, some light, some more difficult. My goal, so I'm an educator and a writer, so my goal is to bring those skills I have to drawing people into having this conversation like we're having today, and to get people talking to each other about these issues. And some of it's going to be light and some of it's not, but I really am seeing this beautiful community growing around our little group. And people come, often young people, by the way, a lot of young people and older people. We have some people who come because they are ill and they're thinking about their mortality. We have some young people who are not thinking about it. But it just come to meet the community, because I think you would find them fascinating, and it might shift some of your own thinking. It certainly has changed mine about talking about death.
So you're taking a break now, but you will be starting up again. And what should we look for to find this information out?
So if you go on the website and get on a mailing list, there's a button that says join the mailing list. Then you will get an email after this break, sometime in May. You'll start getting the emails, and they will list the next 5 or 6 topics. Sometimes we have guests. For example, our last one was about humor. We had an author come and talk about an essay about humor. We had a widow come and talk about proximity to death and what this special sense of what you feel about death after you've lost your person. So we do have guests, and sometimes we have little field trips. Like we went somewhere in the cemetery that I wanted to show everybody this wonderful installation called Circle of Life. So I want you all to learn. I want everyone to learn about Congressional Cemetery, which is an amazing place. I want them to learn about death doulas. I want them to learn about death positivity. That's just what we're doing this year.
And I'm not sure I know what your website is.
congressionalcemetery.org.
Okay.
It's a fantastic, magical place. It's an off-leash dog park. We have an apiary. We do yoga. We have outdoor movies in the summer.
Oh, nice.
I could go on all day. Alice, I think you had a question.
Actually, I wanted to ask you to tell them about some of the famous people or infamous people who are buried at the cemetery. I think that they would like to know that.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to give you my favorites. How's that? My first favorite is not a famous person, but she should be, because as you come into Congressional, there is a gravestone on your right, and it says a lady's name, Ruth Overbeck, and then it says librarian, historian, and where it would say birth and death, it says look it up. Right? Don't you want to do that? I want to do that now, but she took it from us. Anyway, hilarious. We have a former Attorney General of the United States buried there, whose head was stolen and nobody knew it for decades. And until someone came to return the head. If you come to Congressional, I will show you that. We have senators, yes, we do. But we also have Cokie Roberts. So if you're an NPR person, to me, bringing my mother to see Cokie Roberts' grave was a very important moment. As you can see, I'm not very good at the historical significance, but there was a very important entrepreneur in DC around the Civil War who ran a sex work establishment. She was quite successful and wealthy. She has one of the most beautiful graves. So if you come there, and you will see her statue, the statue of her, not of her, but the statue that she put over her mother's grave and her own grave. And there are so few women who get credit. Like most of the women buried at Congressional don't even have their names on it, on the stones. But this person, she created the most beautiful memorial for her sister and her mother and herself and people who worked for her. And she didn't know that sex work would become something we no longer think we should shame. But she did this amazing work here in DC. And when they were making the Indian Museum, the new American Indian Museum, the beautiful structure, when they were digging it up, they found the champagne bottles from her house, which are now in a museum. So I think she's a more important historical figure to my mind. We also have famous photographers and senators and people from the Civil War. Come see them too.
Yeah. Well, that would be very interesting. And I'm actually taking another class given by Courtney Tolbert. I don't know if you know her, but she's going to, I think, give us a tour of the cemetery. Courtney Tolbert. I'll tell her about you too.
We have the most amazing, we call them docents at Congressional. We call them the dozen decent docents, but there's actually scores of them. And they do different themes. They do different topics. We have an LGBTQI corner. The tour for the tours that are for that particular corner of the cemetery are historically gorgeous. These are things that you would not have understood, just looking at them. You need the tour to understand the context of why is this here and why is Hoover buried there and why is this corner there not a coincidence. So come, and I could not do it justice, but come to these guides. There's so many guides. I go on as many of them as I can, and they're all different. They all teach me something really great. And I'm going to have to check out Courtney Tolbert's.
Yeah. Well, thank you for doing this. It's been very both interesting and informative. I took notes, and I might get back to you when I read through the notes again if I have questions.
That's my whole goal, is starting conversations and getting people talking to each other. I am not an expert on anything, but I'm fascinated by this topic as well. And I love learning. So bring the questions and I will find the people who have the answers.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, Laura, for this great conversation and presentation. I will follow up with everybody who's registered with the handouts and the links, so you can keep on learning about death doulas.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Yeah, it was really a good topic and presentation.
Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Barbara, okay.
Did you video it?